Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today's painting tutorial, well, something more of a lesson really to be learned by all of us, and it's really the tale of two flower paintings. Now, I want to talk a little bit firstly about the need to give ourselves permission not to get it right the first time. We tend to want to admonish ourselves for not being perfect the first time out of the box. And I'm telling you right off the bat that painting is not always easy, and you don't always get it right the first time. A bit like talking to camera. The first time I had to speak to someone on screen was a nightmare. I spent an hour just trying to say the words. It didn't come naturally to me. I'm quite a sort of shy person. So sitting here talking to you on screen, in actual fact, just talking to a camera didn't come naturally to me. It took a lot of practice, and some 100-odd videos in, I'm sort of getting more used to it. So the moral of the story is, don't expect to paint the very first time perfectly. Give yourself permission to have a reset and a retry. In fact, you probably learn more from just trying more than once. Now, the little painting over my shoulder there is a painting I was familiar with. I painted it quite a few times actually, but many moons ago. I taught it in class, and I thought I really had it off pat. But it didn't quite work out how I expected it to. And I lost heart with that painting probably quite early on. I realised I was not going to make a very nice job of it, and it really wasn't what I wanted to paint. But I carried on painting because what I needed to do was to get some of the wrinkles out. I needed to get back in the groove. I needed the practice. I hadn't painted flowers for about 4 or 5 years, and it really showed. So I painted the other version, the other shoulder. See, things still go wrong. So I painted this version, and I approached it with a different mindset, with a much better attitude towards it, and I think a much nicer painting was the result. So the moral of this story is, practice makes progress. Not perfect, progress. And if you give yourself permission to restart a canvas, you'll learn so much more than just throwing it in the bin and starting a new subject. Anyway, less of me, more of the painting. On that note, I won't be spending too much time showing you the demonstration on this one, but I'll be spending more time demonstrating that one. Yes, I actually got the right finger to point at the right flower. Yay! Okay, folks, so you know the routine. Sit back, relax, cup of tea. Notepad at the ready this time. See, I can't even remember the words to this either, can I? So just relax and have some fun with it, and give yourself permission to try again. Happy painting, people. For my flower painting, I'll be using these brushes. They're not landscape brushes at all, but small flat brushes, 1/2 inch and 3/8 of an inch. I've also got a small soft fan blender and a liner brush. And of course, a Bob Ross landscape brush just for blending the backgrounds. I'll also be using 2 other brushes. This one's a bit worn out and stumpy, but perfect for scrubbing on colour, and a small round brush for sketching. Sorry, no palette knife this time. Here's my reference photograph. I'll drop a link into the description below. As you can see, I divided my painting into 4 quarters and roughly sketched this on with a pencil. Here's my palette, and I'm going using Bob Ross floral colours throughout. You'll notice there's also a space for some oil. This is linseed oil. I'll use this to thin my paint and help it flow a little easier. The first step is to use a little bit of thinned paint, titanium white, with a few drops of odourless thinners. I'm using the small round brush just to drop in the outline of my flower. I also use it to underpaint the petals. This really helps me see the shape and form of my flower. It also gives me a nice base upon which I can get oil paint to stick. It makes my colours brighter against the black. Allow some time for this layer to dry completely. I've got 2 brands of linseed oil here. One Bob Ross, another one is also an artisan product, but either one will work well. For ease of use, I keep it in a small glass jar. Here I'm using an old scrubby brush, about 1/2 inch wide. just to really scrub this into the background canvas. Keep the flower dry at this stage, but don't worry if you get a little into the edge of the petals, it won't matter. I've covered the entire background, and now I want to reuse this brush, so I dry clean it on a piece of paper towel. My first colour for the background is going to be some ultramarine blue, but as you see against the black, well, it just disappears. Let's add a hint of white, maybe even a touch of turquoise. Now let's see. Wow, makes a huge difference. But remember, the title is Midnight Iris. I don't want my background to be too overpoweringly bright. I add a small amount of mauve to my brush as well, and blend that in too. I'll use my 1-inch Bob Ross brush to blend it all together and make it a nice soft background. Now let's paint some leaves. I've got one of my little 1/2-inch bright brushes. I'm going to mix some ultramarine, some sap green, and just a hint of yellow. Take note, I stay very close to the paint on my palette when I load my brush. Now, let's start. I'm going to start with my paintbrush on edge, and as I come down, I twist the blade to broaden the stroke. These are called dagger leaves, similar to grasses. Here's a close-up view. Touch, twist, and just let the brush fall down the canvas. Top tip here though, make sure you have some continuity. In other words, that the brush strokes at the top there fall in line with some following strokes lower down the canvas. As my brush runs out of paint, I put in just a few background leaves. I call them ghost leaves. They're really not there, but you can still see them. Now, let's paint a bud. I start with this sort of loose football shape, and I just put a small amount of the green colour into that gap just to fill it slightly. There, nothing too bright and bold. These are in the background. Now, touch and just give a small sideways stroke. I want to leave just the hint of colour for the edge of a petal of a developing bud. This touch and flick that I give my brush takes practice, but you can see by following the stroke I'm able to create the illusion of a lovely bud. You'll see me use this stroke a lot throughout this painting. Here I'm going in the other direction and adding a second layer to this little bud. We'll add a little colour to these later on. This little bud, I've added a hint of orange to the colour, just for variety. And just a few highlights to make the edges stand out. Let's start painting the iris. And if you remember, it's dry. I have to first start off by adding a layer of slightly wet paint. And for this, I use my old scrubby brush, a little bit of titanium white, which I'm going to tone down with some blue, a little mauve, and maybe just a hint of black, and some oil. It's important that this layer is sort of quite wet. Ooh, that colour's too bright. Yes, this back petal here wants to be a bit more blue-grey. I've added some green to it to tone it down. It doesn't have to be an exact copy because the reference photograph is just for inspiration's sake. Take note, when I'm blocking in the flower, I still make sure I follow the lines of the petals. This section of my painting has a flipped up petal, and somewhere over in here there must be another one, somewhere in here. I block in this part of the flower as well. Again, take note, the edges of the petal are very loose. This was a mistake I made on the first version where I was a little bit sort of tight with everything. I want this painting to look much more natural. There. I've got a second 1/2 inch brush, again loaded with some oil so it's well primed. I go into some blue and white, and I want to work on this little petal first. Now, it joins onto the centre of the flower, so all my brush strokes must travel in the right direction. Touch, press, and give it a little flick. But I want to come off before I hit this edge of the petal in front of it. As you see, I'm actually picking up colour from behind the flower. Remember, we put some blues and some lavenders on. And I want that colour to leak through into the edge of my flower. The second petal overlaps the first one. So I start off with a nice press and a push. And again, I'm travelling down the petal to the centre of the flower. You can see here that I have a little overlap. It's important that I have this line coming from the back of the petal to the little overlap section here. A little brighter colour too really helps. Then I'm going to tip this into the right hand edge of the flower. From there over to there will be another little flipped back edge that's going to be going in the opposite direction. Now, I know this can be very confusing, knowing that I'm pulling suddenly in a different direction to the first lot of strokes, but you'll see now why I put that little dot there. It tells me which way I'm going to be brushing the paint. Every time I press and pull, I leave a little imprint of the bristles that looks like the ruffled edge of a petal. There. There's another little bit of petal in the background here, and I think on reflection I probably should have painted that bit first, but it doesn't matter. You can do them in a different order if you wish. A few little outward flicks and that part of the petal is complete. And as you see on the reference photograph, this was quite a little tangle of detail, so I made the best of it. One last little flick, that'll put the edge of the petal back in. I continue working around my flower, again looking for little folded back edges, little flipped up edges, little ruffles. This takes practice, as I mentioned, and I was out of practice, and my first version, as I said, was a little bit stiff and starchy, but after a couple of hours of play I managed to get a much better shape to my petals. For instance, notice how this one really swoops up, and again it has to be joining onto the stem somehow. Here's a close-up of my brushwork if my hand gets out the way. By working in layers you create these little defects in the edges. Well, they're not really a defect, it's actually a ruffle. Notice how I'm going to make a little arch, a little V shape. It's where the edge of the petal turns back on itself and creates a little split. There. Now let's add a little shadow to this area. I use my small round brush and a little bit of background colour. With some careful blending and pulling some of the green from a stem into this little area, it looks like my petal has got a fold in it. I have one more little fold here as well. I start off with a nice clean bright stroke of colour and then add more strokes to build up the shape of a petal. If you give your brush a little wobble, there you go, it looks like a folded back edge of a petal. Now, I redid this petal several times because I wasn't convinced I had it quite right. The reference photograph was a little confusing, not easy to follow, and well, that's the point of using a reference photograph. I try not to paint an exact copy. Notice here I have 3 petals all overlapping each other. I rely on some of the shadow from the background petals to make the foreground petal stand out. Again, nice long strokes here. Let's do another one of those little wobbly edges just for fun. once you see this process done a few times, you soon start to spot a pattern in the brushwork. There. Sometimes I tip my brush slightly on a corner to get a different sort of shape from the edge of the petal. I realised when I looked back at this petal that it wasn't quite right. It's supposed to be joining on here, but it was sort of going off at an angle. I realised I'd added too much paint to this area. So let's repair it. I used my small round brush, and again, some of the blue and mauve and a little touch of green, just to add a shadow. I'll even add a little shadow at the base of that little bud. A little more reshaping, and there we are, fixed. Now it looks like it's joining on to the centre of the flower. And I also realised that this little folded back edge was going in the wrong direction. So again, just a few brush strokes to turn it over to face the right way. If you enjoy my tutorials, don't forget to like and subscribe. When you hit the subscribe button, don't forget, look through the options and ring the little bell. It means that every time I put out a new tutorial, you'll get a small email from YouTube that there's something new for you to watch, and that way you can stay up with everything I'm painting. I'd also like to thank my lovely subscribers who leave super thanks for me, and those who buy me a coffee. Well, I spend the money on more painting supplies. Your support is very much appreciated. Thank you. My flower is developing quite nicely. Once again, I've decided to add a ruffle. I create a little arch shape in the petal, and you can see here another little ruffle is developing as well. Now, time to go back and add some extra highlights. Flowers take several layers to develop. When painting on a black canvas, the first layer was some thinned out white paint, just to make a grey background. The second layer was some thinned oily paint. Then I groomed that into shape, and then this layer, which is some additional highlights. This paint is used almost dry, with very little oil. I want the paint to really stick well. If I put oil into it, it will flow into the background colours too easily. So I work from thinner to thicker colours. Now, let's add a little colour to some of these background buds. There. Again, nothing too bright and bold. They're the supporting cast, not the main feature, but boy, they're good fun to do. Time to add some detail. Lots of veins. That's the cat flap going again as usual. It's almost like clockwork, isn't it? I start off with my liner brush and some oil to thin out my paint. And up through the centre of these petals is a little lime green vein. It's not so easy to see on the reference photograph, but I'll try and include a little shot here of it in the corner of the video. Once again, these are very directional. Pay careful attention how they work in with the rest of the petal. If you go off at an angle, it'll really stand out. Let's add some veins to this main petal. Again, watch those angles. I made a mistake on the first painting that I did of the iris, and well, you can see the end result. It just didn't work out very well at all. I've added a little more orange to it now. Study the photograph and you'll see that these little veins are quite something to behold. The detail contained within a flower can be, well, breathtaking. I do my best to try and capture some of that in my painting. Just a quick thank you to the photographer who lists all his work on Pixabay. Once again, I'll leave a link to this down in the comments below. He does some amazing work, and I'm sure I'll be painting some more of his reference photographs in future. I'm going to add a few extra splashes of colour to my flower. A little yellow, a little gold, a little orange here and there. Just for fun. It adds that little extra something to my painting. So there you have it. The tale of two paintings, and the reason why you shouldn't be too hard on yourself if at first you don't succeed. But I want you to succeed in painting this painting. Happy painting, people!